And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey, coming off a Memorial Day weekend. A very happy Memorial Day to all those that are listening right now. I guess at this point, a belated happy Memorial Day. And thank you, obviously, to all those that have served and have unfortunately given your life in the line of duty to keep our country free. Obviously, that is what this past weekend was all about. But also, hopefully, it was a fun, exciting kind of way to kick off the summer as well. And George, I'm very excited for this podcast because you're back. And you know what I just learned in the last few days, George, was that your internet provider must be a big Blue Horseshoe Pod fan because they were listening, and then all of a sudden they must listen to Thursday's solo show, realized, oh boy, Ryan's on his own. George's internet is not working. We got to get this fixed ASAP. And what do you know? Bing, bang, boom on the holiday weekend. It's fixed, and you are here back, George. So I'm glad we know we have, at least in the internet provider community, a big fan of the Blue Horseshoe Pod, and they knew we got to get George back.
Your solo pod numbers are soaring, though. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I should stay sidelined. We'll see. We'll see how the numbers go this time.
I bet you it's one of those car crash situations where it's like it's so bad you can't look away, sort of thing. That's more what we'll go for here, for sure. But happy you are back here. Happy your internet. For those who missed it on Thursday, unfortunately, George's not off. George, just for whatever reason, the damn Wi-Fi was not cooperating. Maybe it already took the weekend off, the holiday weekend off, and was not cooperating. But here it is on a work day, back and ready to go. And we got to get your takeaways, George, because you had boots on the ground, feet, eyes at OTA training camp here. We kind of hit on a few of the storylines on Thursday's pod, but I really want to get your perspective since you were there in person to see a lot with what was going on. So we got a lot to talk about here in terms of O-line depth concerns, Shaq Leonard injury update, Anthony Richardson splitting reps, and also, too, we got some big news, a nice little holiday news dump here in the NFL. DeAndre Hopkins released. He does have some parameters of the next team he's looking for. We'll discuss if the Colts fit those parameters and the likelihood of maybe D-Hop, still one of the best receivers in the NFL, maybe coming to Indy. We'll discuss that on the pod. But let's, George, talk about what people care about the most, quarterback. And it was interesting in the first team activities, official with Anthony Richardson and Shane Steichen, now a part of the Colts. In the first public practice, we saw basically a 50-50 split of first team reps between Gardner Minshew and Anthony Richardson. What'd you think of that approach? Because we've seen in instances like in Houston with CJ Stroud and Carolina with Bryce Young, there was no split. They were the second string. They were running strictly with the backups. We saw Anthony Richardson get some reps of the first team. What was kind of your takeaway from at least how the quarterback reps were split between Richardson and Minshew?
Yeah, I think Bryce Young did get some first team reps.
He did? Okay.
But I don't think he got all of them. I don't think it was the whole thing. It wasn't quite 50-50. It's probably closer to 60-40. Minshew had a little bit more. But part of that, too, was that Richardson was also taking second team reps. So he got more reps total than either Richardson or than either Minshew or Ellinger. He might have more than they did combined, honestly, which is probably a good call. Because he was out there, it felt like he was out there the whole time. You know, Minshew would come and do his thing, and then Richardson would stay with the twos, and then you never have a lot of rep for threes this time of year or any time of year. So, you know, that you didn't see a lot of Ellinger, but a whole lot of Richardson, which I think we were talking about that when we were, you know, how should this look? That it's a real competition. That's clear. They're giving both guys a chance to show what they're doing. But also that you're giving Richardson every chance to learn. And I think that's why the twos were so important because, you know, every time he drops back, it's just incredibly valuable for this team. And they were rotating through the receivers a lot. And of course, two of the big names weren't there. You didn't have Josh Downs, who's dealing with a little knee issue. You didn't have Michael Pittman Jr., who is, I think, very happy, as he should be, celebrating the birth of his second child. So, you know, that was a little bit muddled anyway, but I think that they took advantage of that and just rotated guys through. You saw a lot of different receivers, and that's good too because everybody needs work with both of these guys. You don't know who's going to be on game day. The interesting thing to me was Ashton Dulin, you know, afterwards talking about the differences between the two, and obviously he was talking about how the ball pops out of Anthony Richardson's hands, but, you know, he said, yeah, they throw a different ball. Clearly, the arm strength with Richardson. There's probably not many guys in the league that match that. Certainly not on the roster. So not that Minshew has poor arm strength. It's just Richardson's on a different level. It's
Pales
he's
in comparison.
yeah and just about everyone. I mean
Right.
it's not
It's
it's
not
a
a
very
Minshew
small
problem.
group. Yeah, it's not a Minshew problem. It's a very small group of guys across the league that would be in the conversation with him. But he said from a receiver standpoint, it doesn't matter. You catch the ball. Whether they throw completely different balls or whether it's just a little subtle differences, it doesn't matter. Their whole focus right now, and it sounds like it's coming straight from Reggie Wayne. As he's talking, you just kind of hear Reggie in his ear. It's run your route correctly, be where you're supposed to be, and catch the ball. You don't worry about anything else. And I think that, to me, the reason that's interesting right now is we don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be week one. We don't know, is it going to be a package for Richardson? So they're going to see both quarterbacks at times during a game, Is there going to be change during the year? That seems likely at some point, whether there's injury or if Minshew is the week one starter and Richardson comes in later. And the receivers are approaching this like, it doesn't matter. They've got a job to do, and that's what they're focused on. And whoever's under center is under center.
I think it's absolutely, like I said, the right, especially now with OTAs when it's still so early, where you're more kind of worried about your almost own fundamentals and details and learning the playbook than, worrying about who's throwing you the ball right now. You have so much time, obviously, to develop chemistry with both quarterbacks. That's part of the reason why early on, I do like that Richardson is getting a good amount of first team reps. And I love the fact that you point out that he's getting all the second team reps. We talked about this in kind of our basically OTA preview pod last week, in case you missed it. Blue Horseshoe Pod on Twitter, Blue Horseshoe Pod on YouTube, and also Blue Horseshoe Podcast, where you get your podcasts. Where we talk about the most important thing for Richardson, right, is development and reps. And he's only going to learn by doing more and more and more and getting that practice in, especially now. So, well, like you said, the majority of reps went to Minshew for I'll put in quotes, air quotes, first teamers. Like you said, you hit on some of the absences at receiver, at running back, at offensive line. So it really was kind of a hodgepodge of players everywhere that, with all things considered, with everyone healthy, would not be on the first team. But anyway, you're still getting a good amount of reps with guys that should be starters, but also you're getting overall reps in general, which especially right now in May and June, you need to help develop going forward here and kind of develop consistency, which is obviously the biggest thing for Richardson. We know he has the physical tools, but now can you replicate good performances again and again and again? So early on, at least, I like the splits and I like the way Shane Steichen is handling it. Obviously, Minshew is a veteran, and obviously Minshew is someone who's been in the Shane Steichen system previously, being with the Eagles. So it's not like he needs a lot of reps. It's not like he needs a lot of work to be ready if they decide down the road he is to be the starter. So right now, especially when it's still early on, give Richardson as many reps as he can handle, because it's only going to benefit his growth and benefit his development as we get closer to training camp and obviously as we get closer so far to the season.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're seeing. And I think it's going to be an interesting, I think that relationship is going to be interesting throughout the year. Minshew seems to have already kind of won over the locker room too, which I think is not surprising. He's
No.
a pretty laid back guy. He's got a really fun personality. And they all said that you can feel his knowledge and his football IQ even now. That he's making checks at the line of scrimmage. He's changing plays. He's doing things you would expect a veteran quarterback to do. Obviously, Richardson's not there yet. He's still learning the playbook. He's not going up and changing plays. He's still making sure he's running the right play. That's where he's at in his progress. And it'll be interesting to see if that has an impact, as we go through training camp and get in closer to the season. Is that part of the criteria on who's going to start week one? Do they feel like, Minshew's ability to get them into the right play against a different defensive look could be the difference? Or do they feel like Richardson's there? And again, I kind of tried to ask Shane Steichen about it on Thursday, but he didn't. He answered the question well, but he didn't really answer the question I asked, which is already a veteran move by him. But because we can't see that mental side, so I want to know how that's coming. We talked about that before. We're not going to know where Richardson is in there, except from comments from things like receivers and linemen and the guys who are in the huddle with him. Doolin did say that in the huddle, he's been very forceful and he's calling the play with authority, and they like where he is there right now. But that to me is the key factor between now and week 1 that we really will not get a lot of info on. How strong is he with this offense? When does he get to the point where he gets to the line of scrimmage and realizes the defense is in a look that this play doesn't call for? And how important is that in the grand scheme of things? Because I think that's one of the scales here you've got to balance. What's more important, his development or the offense's ability to be in the ideal play and not necessarily the play that was called? It'll be interesting to see how they balance that and how that goes. It's something that, if you talk to people in Florida, he was pretty good with that at Florida, even though he's a 1-year starter in that 1 year. And even though they had new coaching staff and there was a lot of things that he was learning on the fly, he did, over the course of that year, grow and be able to make audibles and things at the line of scrimmage. So we'll see how that goes as a pro.
Let me just, I guess, say what I'm about to say, but put a caveat here of the sense that it's only May, right? Like, we're not trying to get too ahead of ourselves. But I'm glad you brought up Shane Steichen, because one thing he said on Thursday did kind of raise my eyes and did have me feel so far encouraged, again, being May, but encouraged so far of the direction and the development of Richardson, was when he was talking about how he likes what he's seen so far from Anthony, and that there was some, at least in practice so far, some next level stuff that he was doing. You mentioned before, Shane Steichen already, despite this just being months on the job as a head coach for the first time, is very media savvy and is very good at giving nothing. I thought for me that was one of the more detailed and like, wow, he actually said something and didn't just skirt the question or just say some classic coach speak. He kind of gave you a little bit of like a crumb of just like, hey, so far he's looking good. And there were some things that he was almost impressed by. Did you kind of hearing Steichen talking about that? Does that again make you feel kind of good so far that everything seems to be going in line? Or is that still maybe like, okay, it's Steichen, it's coach speak, it's May, let's not kind of get too ahead of ourselves?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you. There's caveats there. Part of it too is we don't really know him well enough yet to know, is that going to be the answer all the time? One of the things when Andrew Luck was here, we used to always laugh about is, early on in his career, he was talking about how great Samson Sattelli was. He's a great center. And it's, after that, every time he would call somebody great, it just didn't carry that much weight, because you just felt like it says that about everyone. So, take it with a grain of salt. But we're not there with Steichen yet. We don't really have any clue. And as you said, what we have dealt with him, he's not been a guy to just kind of quickly come out and throw praise out. He's not throwing everybody under the bus either. I don't want to suggest that. But he's not been a guy that everybody you ask about, he just starts, effusively praising them and this is great and that's great. And, a lot of times he just kind of, like you said earlier, either doesn't give you much of anything or it's just basic coach speak. I think with Blake Freeland or somebody, he basically said, he's big and he's fast. It was a scouting report. It wasn't, anything more than that. So I think it did raise some eyebrows when he starts talking about, especially next level stuff. And in particular, he was talking about throws, and I think there was one about midway through practice where Kylan Granson had about a step on the defender, and it was an intermediate throw. It was the kind of thing that he's working on, a timing throw, and right over the middle of the field, and he put the ball exactly where it needed to be. And Granson caught it in stride, was able to outrun that defender and get to the sideline. Would have been like a 60-yard touchdown. It was 7-on-7, so you got to take that into account. There wasn't defensive linemen there with their hands up and those sorts of things. But it was still a kind of throw that you're like, okay, that's what he's supposed to struggle with. And that was not just good. It was, next level kind of stuff. When the guy's defended like that, and you've got to put it exactly where it needs to be. He had another deep ball to Malik Turner, who's been in the league a little bit, but hasn't really caught on anywhere. And I think that's one of the interesting things. And it's one of the things I noted on the practice field. I forget who I was talking to, probably Nate Atkins. It's usually Nate. But he keeps making me look up receivers. And I think that's a good quality. If someone catches the ball, who is that? it shows that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be thrown to Pittman, who obviously wasn't there. He's still making plays with a lot of different guys, and I think that's a positive.
Again, like we said, it's May, right? So we're not going to get carried away. But when you hear, like you said, when you hear you talk about how he's making guys look better than they are, when you hear Shane Steichen, like I said, who rarely gives kind of you any sort of detail or any sort of answer, like I said, it's not negativity, it's not praise. He just kind of is in the middle of saying nothing. To hear him talk about next level, some next level plays, and so far he likes the way he's progressing. You feel good so far, at least about the direction early on the Colts have with Richardson. And it feels, at least to me, that early on looks like the track for him starting week one is looking, more and more likely, which is obviously good. You want to get him on the field as quickly as you can when he's ready to be on the field. And if he's shown you already that it's likely he can be ready to go for week number one, maybe again, some of the development we thought had to be worked on more. Maybe the learning curve is not as steep as you may have thought, back in February and even in March. So it's encouraging so far. Like I said, all the signs are looking up. Kind of, if you want to even say check boxes, again, maybe too early to even say that, but kind of like you're kind of heading in that right path there and right track of progression. And it's good to your point about making guys like Malik Turner look good. And you're like, wow, who's that receiver? Who's that receiver? We've seen, like, one of the things that made both Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck greats was the fact that they made everyone around them better. And we are starting to see now in the NFL, especially with quarterback salaries skyrocketing, that second contract, it's so hard to win because you need your quarterback not only to play well, but when you're paying them that much money, now all of a sudden the cast around them is going to get lesser, right? It's obvious, simple math, simple finances, and you need your quarterback to make those around him better, not the other way around. And we have obviously seen that with guys like Patrick Mahomes. He has made a lot of players around him better. If Anthony Richardson is able in 3, 4, 5 years to do the same thing where he comes in and you don't need two bona fide top flight wide receivers in order to have success, he can have success with Michael Pittman Jr. and whoever, and the third receiver he makes better just because he's putting the ball where it's supposed to be and giving them, a chance to succeed more often than not. All of a sudden now you're going to feel really good about the direction of this team. And that's really where the Colts could be viable contenders each and every year. It really comes down to not only can you have your quarterback play well, but it's once they get paid, and now we're seeing quarterbacks get paid earlier and earlier. Now it's, can you make the players around you better? And again, it's a small sample size. It's a few throws, but at least in OTAs, you maybe could start to get that inkling if he could be that guy where if he figures it out, he can make those around him better, which is huge, obviously, for the Colts right now going forward, because you don't have to worry about building a roster like the 49ers have of Pro Bowl guys at every position. You can get away with sometimes, paying some players and letting others go and kind of being weaker in some areas, but that'll be made up by the great play of the quarterback.
Yeah, I think the most important thing right now is he's not throwing out red flags. You're not seeing a lot of throws that you're just like, that's unacceptable. That's not going to cut it. That would be, and it's happened in the past, not with first round quarterbacks, but you've seen guys out there even this time of year where, man, that's rough. That's going to be tough to work with. And he's not doing that. So and I think that was one of the fears coming in, that possibly there would be not a majority of those throws, but a significant amount of them because he was so raw and inexperienced, and that you would have a lot of instances where he's not putting the ball where it was supposed to be. Some of that right now is, just a step above routes versus air. So again, you got to take that into account, but there's no big red flags. Now, what's fun to me, and it's going to be fun to watch as we go through the season, usually the mandatory minicamp, that's a couple weeks away here, is a little bit of a step up from this. There's levels to everything in the NFL, and the OTAs are at one speed and one kind of level of competitiveness. And then the mandatory minicamp is usually somewhere between that and training camp. You're not quite in a full training camp mode, but there's a little bit more juice to it because they know they're going to be gone for the summer, and you're starting to get into training camp mode. And then training camp is another level up. And then when he gets in the preseason games, that's when we'll really start. If he's still doing these things, in August when they're playing preseason games, that's when I think you'll really start to, okay, this, there's something here. And then obviously going to take that into the regular season. So we'll see where it goes. But so far, everything you hear from people, everything you see with your own eyes is positive. And that's good. Now, that being said, that was true Matt Ryan this time of year last year too. So you've got to keep that all in perspective.
That, especially for myself, George, because I definitely am an optimist. So I like to maybe see a few things and I don't say get carried away, but maybe get carried away. And that is a good humbling point because you are right. Last year, Matt Ryan, you heard a lot of great things, especially in training camp about his leadership. And I really thought, I think a lot of people did as well. This team was going to win the division. They were, going to be maybe not a Super Bowl contender, but at least definitely be a playoff team without a doubt. And then, like I said, as soon as the bullets really started flying, that's when all of a sudden things went off the rails. And the team we saw in training camp that was feeling good, and at least there were some positive vibes coming out and some rave reviews about his leadership and ball placement and getting on guys and being the coach on the field, it all just collapsed. So you are right about that. Getting excited about a few throws and OTAs and hearing Shane Steichen maybe say some positive things about Anthony Richardson, truly in the grand scheme of things, doesn't mean anything. Does not mean he's going to succeed. Does not mean he's going to be the best quarterback in the NFL in 3 years. But it definitely is a good step. And so far, like I said, it's heading in the right direction. I want to give you a lot of credit here because you called this, you brought it up right after the draft about Chris Ballard, and there's some reason to feel optimism about the team going forward. But one of the areas you said he really swung and missed on in free agency, but overall in general, was offensive line depth. And they drafted, they went heavy in the draft and draft free agency in terms of signing guys and drafting offensive linemen. But the one area they're severely lacking, George, is veteran offensive line depth. And it did not take long to quickly see how ugly this could get. You saw on Thursday, Braden Smith had what Shane Steichen called, going back to him, not giving us anything, a little thing on his leg. Was it a cut? Was it stitches? Was it infection? Was it a bee sting? I have no idea, George. Whatever that little thing on his leg was obviously bad enough to keep him out of practice. Why that was concerning is with Braden Smith out, the offensive right tackle in the starting five was Blake Freeland, rookie out of BYU. So you are quickly seeing, George, right away, how if there's even one injury to this team, we could be talking about a second-year left tackle in Bernard Ryman, a second-year player, because I know he's been on the team a little bit longer than that, but really outside of last year did not get a lot of playing time in right guard, possibly in Will Fries. And if Braden Smith, let's just say, God forbid, goes down and has to miss a game or two in an extended stretch, you could have Blake Freeland at right tackle and all of a sudden have three guys combined 20 starts, if that, playing taking up a majority of offensive line. The veteran offensive line depth, George, was a problem, and now you're already seeing it on the first public session of OTAs, kind of give you, I don't say foreshadowing, but just kind of underscore how bad, veteran-wise, the depth is on the offensive line behind the starting five.
Yeah, that to me is the most surprising thing about the roster. We talked about that a lot during this offseason, like you said, that there's not really veteran backups here. There's not guys who've been around. It's something that they've done almost the entire time Ballard's been here. They brought in maybe not great talent, but guys who've been in the league, who had played these positions before into these backup roles. And so where's that going to come from? I think that, to me, I still think that's the one area that they're not done with. I just don't. I can't believe they feel confident and comfortable with where that depth chart is right now. And there are guys out there, especially guards out there that are still on the free agent market that they could bring in who could even compete for starting jobs. But even more so, like you said, it's very rare. I remember the celebrations we had a couple years ago around here when the offensive line played all 16 games. And now it's 17. So if it was rare with 16, you can imagine how rare it's going to be with 17. You need that second team at some point, not all of them, but you need them to come up. And even if it's just a week or two here and there, they've got to be able to go. And like you said, if that line had been playing on a regular season Sunday, probably would have been some problems. And it wouldn't have been fun for the rookie. And there were times even in the OTAs where he got a decent amount of pressure. Now, it's half speed, and I don't want to read too much into that, but I know one point in particular, DeForest Buckner got in there really fast, and you just saw Richardson kind of get away, and he ended up making a pass about 20 yards down the field. But it was one of those times where you wonder, okay, that was a nice move, but if this is live, is he sacked right now? And I think that of all the ways to help your rookie quarterback, the offensive line to me is at the top of the list. Because we talked about it before. You don't want him getting bad habits. You don't want him dropping his eyes, watching the pass rush, worrying more about that than trying to get the ball downfield. He didn't do those things in Florida. They had a good line, too. I mean, there's a lot of guys on that line that were pretty darn good. It wasn't top of the line, but it was a really good offensive line, and I don't think he had to worry about those things. It will be interesting to see, because I just think that's one of the quickest ways that you can develop bad habits in your quarterback is to have that offensive line collapsing on him every time. Andrew Luck dealt with it, and he ended up having a really solid rookie year anyway. But I just think it is a recipe for disaster.
And that, like, we just talked about Richardson and in the sense that, like, or the caveat, hey, it's still early, let's not get carried away. This is, though, one of those things, the offensive line depth, George, where I don't think it's too early to panic and too early to freak out, just because, like you said, when we talk about Richardson's development, it's always assumed a lot of it is in his control and the coach's control. Footwork, mechanics, accuracy, decision-making, a lot of it is on Richardson and the coaching staff to help him come along. But part of his development is out of his control. And that part is getting good offensive line play, like you mentioned, to where he has the time to be able to read defenses. He has the time to allow his receivers to run the proper routes and then read a defense instead of just getting the ball, looking down at the rush. Oh, shoot, there's a jailbreak already. Let me get out of here and try to make a hero play. That can only get you so far. It will definitely develop bad habits. And you mentioned Andrew Luck. Sure, the Colts were 11-5 with Andrew Luck and a terrible offensive line. It didn't bite them in the butt in 2012, but it bit him in the butt in 2017, and 2018, 2019, because all those hits he took and bounced back from eventually caught up to him a few years later, and he retired way earlier than he should have, in part because of that lack of protection he got starting all the way back in his rookie year. So, I mean, if you are Chris Ballard and you saw that's the tail end, at least, of what happens when you don't protect your quarterback early, the ramifications of it, I don't get how you can kind of sit back and say, we'll be okay again after last year, the lack of depth really blew up in your face. And now you're basically doing the same thing this year where, sure, you address it in the draft and you get new players and you hope that some of them, do pan out and do work out, but you're still going down now a inexperienced path, which is not always the best thing for for offensive lineman with a rookie quarterback. It's one thing when Matt Ryan is there, he can almost help coach along some of the guys on the offensive line. It's different when it's a rookie trying to help now rely on other rookies or young, inexperienced players to help block for him. It's a problem, George. And I'm worried that we talk about, okay, Chris Ballard, like you said, there's guys out there that you could sign. I'm worried that he's not going to do it because at this point, we've heard him talk about it. And now this is a second year in a row where he's talked the talk in terms of offensive line, but has not walked the walk. And until he does it, George, I don't think in this specific area, he deserves the benefit of the doubt, which is concerning.
No, I agree. I mean, I think last year, so many things went wrong that the benefit of the doubt in general right now is hard to just kind of concede with this team. But this area is just so important. Now, he has a track record, over the time he's been here, of bringing guys in June and July and even August and September that end up impacting this line. I mean, guys like Chris Reed, even Matt Pryor, whose first year here, was the kind of player we're talking about right now, coming in for a week or two and help things out. Mark Lewinsky was, I think, a December pickup, who ended up helping out the next year. Those are the kinds of things that they need, not necessarily the December one this year, probably a little bit faster than that. But I think I want to say Chris Reed was a June guy, late May, this time of year. They've got to be on the lookout for that. But I agree. I don't think they don't deserve the benefit of the doubt that they are going to do it. But to me, that's the one area that still needs a lot of work in terms of getting some people in here. I would say at least one interior and a swing tackle that you can bring in and you can feel good about. If they need to start for a week or two here and there, then so be it. And at this point, I'm not in love with the idea that Ryman is unchallenged at left tackle. Yeah, he's a breakout candidate. He finished the year well, and those are all positive things. And I think he's got one of the best mindsets of any of the linemen on the team. He understands what he needs to do. He's as critical on himself as anyone on this roster. But him, basically coming in uncontested to training camp at left tackle, that's not great. I don't love that.
And for me, like, that's part of the reason why I can't give Ballard, at least right now, the faith or the belief that maybe he deserves, just because of the sense that, like you said, he talked about last year, one of his big regrets was going into training camp and going to the season with Matt Pryor basically being already ordained as a left tackle, no competition. Obviously, we saw how that worked out terribly. And now, yes, Ryman is more promising. I would say it has more talent. And again, he finished off, especially the last month. There's reason, like you said, to believe and hope. But the reality is he's a second-year guy that's still inexperienced. It's still trying to learn the position. And there's no veteran there to bare minimum push him and make him better and maybe teach him a few, tricks of the trade along the way. It's like you repeat it. You talked about the mistake you made and having no competition. And now you're repeating it a year later. So something's got to change here, George. And so far, specifically with the O-line, it seems while some of the faces and the names have changed from last year to this year, the same overall philosophy is there, and that's concerning.
If this offense gets off to another slow start and things are, clunky the way they were a year ago, this is the most likely reason why. I mean, sure, the rookie quarterback's going to have his ups and downs, and we expect that. I think everyone watching right now expects that, understands that that's going to be part of the package here. But if the offensive line is just not able to get the job done to the extent that at times last year it was not able to get the job done, the offense isn't going anywhere. And that's, obviously it's bad for Richardson. It's bad for Shane Steichen too. You're trying to put in your offense. You're trying to, put your scheme in, get buy-in in this locker room, get buy-in from the fan base, because people, they know his resume. They don't know who he is yet. They don't know what this team's going to look like with him. One of the things that jumps right off the page at you in Philadelphia is that offensive line. This is one of the first things you notice.
Oh, yeah.
How dominant they are, how physical they are. If this offensive line is at a below average, and, look, maybe Ryman's ready to be that breakout guy. Maybe the big three are going to have bounce back years and play to the level that we've seen them play in the past. And maybe Will Fries is ready to do enough. And in this line, I'm not saying the line can't get the job done. I'm just saying you can't feel really confident about it. Again, the benefit of the doubt is not there. And if one of them goes down, you're pretty much back in the same situation you were a year ago.
And this year, I would argue the offensive line is even more important than last year, where, yes, you had a statue of Matt Ryan and he could not move, so you really needed to protect him. And obviously, Richardson is way more mobile and athletic, but we're talking about development here, right? Like, this is like, sure, the Matt Ryan experiment failed, and it was a 1-year waste, and now they reset. But it's like, if the offensive line continues to be porous, continues to let down the quarterback, again, we're not just talking about, oh, okay, we'll move on from Richardson and go on from here. You're talking about development and his growth being hurt, which could impact the next 3, 4, 5 years. It could impact the job status of Shane Steichen if he's not able to run the full offense or develop Anthony Richardson to the quarterback he thinks he can become, because you're changing the way you play the game, because you can't trust the 5 guys in front of him to give him time to make the proper reads and go through the offense and run certain plays the way you should, because the offensive line stinks. So it's like, I don't think we're being dramatic here, George, of freaking out here in late May about the lack of depth, just because, like I said, you see one injury to guy in Braden Smith, who, look, let's be real, he probably would have played if this is a regular season game, right? It's OTAs. Caution obviously should be exerted, but you get a twisted ankle. It was even just one game. It's like, this is really scary, the inexperience of the guys that are supposed to be protecting for Richardson and the long-lasting impact that could have, where, if Smith is out for an extended amount of time, and then all of a sudden it's, you're talking about an extended amount of time now that Richardson possibly has to change his game if the offensive line can't hold up, you could be hurting his chances to succeed right away. And it's concerning, George. It really is. And like I said, it has to be addressed right away. But I'm worried that we're going down. It seems to me we're going down the same path for this offensive line we did last year, again this year. And it's unacceptable. And it's also extremely concerning.
I can't agree more. There's not been, and Chris Ballard stood up there at the combine and said, "There's going to be competition on the line. We're going to fix that." And right now, I don't see it on paper. It's not there.
Obviously, look, training camp, you'll get cuts, right? Like you said, May and June, there'll be there are already players out there now. There will be players available that maybe you don't think will become available. So there's still plenty of time for moves to be made. But at least an early season prediction, George, do you think by week 1, Blake Freeland will be the backup tackle?
Right now, I don't see, again, the benefit of the doubt is just not there. And I
Right.
don't see, are there guys that'll pop free? That's hard to predict. Is there somebody that will pop free that wants to come here too? Because that's the other part of it. I mean, a lot of those guys, when they end up getting cut, they want to go to a team that's ready to win right now. If they've got that option, they're probably not going to come here. Of course, if you're looking at the backup guys, they may not be thinking the same way, but you've got to get them in here. And that's the other thing is too, I think the sooner the better, because with this young line, the sooner you've got some veteran guys in the mix, the better that they can come in and start teaching habits and getting these guys going. Now, Nelson and Kelly and Smith can do that, and I'm sure are doing that right now. But that's one of those areas where I just don't think you can't have too many of those guys. You can't have too many mentors for your young offensive linemen. That's just not the case. And I feel like right now they're putting a lot on Tony Sparano Jr.'s plate.
Yeah.
This is them saying we're going to fix this through coaching. And I feel like that's been a lot. We talked about that before. I feel like there's been a theme of the offseason that there's a lot on this coaching staff's plate to get things turned around. There's been more change there than there has been on the roster outside of the rookies. We talked about that earlier. There's almost a third of the roster right now is rookies. And that's saying something about them wanting to kind of have this soft rebuild and move forward with young guys who are going to grow in Shane Steichen's system. But as far as like 2023 improvement goes, there's a lot on this coaching staff. And I think Sparano is at the top of the list when it comes to that, as far as guys with a lot on his shoulders and a lot being expected of. Good things being said about him right now. But again, if there weren't, that would really be a problem. We'll see as they start going up against other teams. And that the bad thing about the offensive line is one of the last things that you see, because they're not going to do a lot of work right now that you can gauge anything on. And even in preseason, yeah, but you're still not doing a lot of the stunts. You're not doing what you're going to do in a regular season. It's one of the last pieces that you see, live and see how it all comes together. And it's one of the most important pieces on the team. So, yeah, I don't think there's any hyperbole to be worried about that right now.
And the last thing I want to mention you too, because you brought up a great point of, look, when they're healthy, Nelson, Kelly, Smith played a lot of games together, very experienced. So if those guys, let's say, can hopefully knock on wood, as I am superstitious and I'm doing right now, they can play 17 games each, and that can help the development of Ryman. And let's just say, for argument's sake right now, Will Fries, like, you can have those veteran guys help them along, no problem. But the concerning part is like you said, is if one of those guys goes down and now all of a sudden it's not even just the practice time, there's a film session. It's once you're in the game now, if you're talking about a majority of the offensive line that's in experience, that's when it's real. Like, there's nothing Braden Smith, let's just say if he's the one hurt, can do on the sideline during a week 2 game to help, Blake Freeland come along. It's like one of those things where, sure, in game, if he's at, let's just say, right guard and Braden Smith maybe in the game can help him. But if he's out, once game time comes, it's really, really hard to actually, have that experience and have even Tony Sparano Jr. really kind of help these guys along. And that's obviously where it matters the most. And that's why having some veteran backup depth is of the utmost importance right now. And so far, for whatever reason, does not seem to be a big priority on Chris Ballard's off-season list. I don't know why, George. I don't know if it's the definition of insanity. I don't know if, it's like you said, our problem is not talent, it's coaching. But either way, they're playing right now a very dangerous game where you are trying to thread a needle, or, thread the needle and hope that guys stay healthy, which, as you know, in the NFL, it's a war of attrition. Really, for the most part, the healthiest teams are the ones that win at the end of the day. And when you're kind of playing a game of, hey, 5 guys, we feel good about these 5 guys, and just let's hope they don't get hurt, odds are not usually in your favor. You can get lucky. No, absolutely not. The numbers by far are not on your side. Definitely not on your side. Speaking of injuries, George, I think unfortunately a perfect segue into at least the final topic of OTA wise, and that is Shaq Leonard. We were talking about on our preview pod. What will he be out there? We found out our answer on at least on Thursday's media public session. He was not on the field. At least on when I was kind of giving my takeaways, George, on Thursday, I'm not ready to push the panic button yet on Shaq Leonard. For two reasons. Number one, look, it's still early. Really, when I'll start to get panic is around training camp if he's not out there, because at that point, then something really is wrong. But also, too, it's like one of these injuries where there's no definitive timeline. Like it's rare to see the injury he's dealing with. It doesn't happen very often. So we don't have like a torn ACL. Okay, be about 9 or 10 months, he'll be back, or a hamstring tweak. Okay, a few weeks, he'll be back. Like it's one of these injuries where there's truly no exact timetable. So the fact that he's not out there now for OTAs, I'm going to go on a limb and probably say he's not going to be out there for mini camp as well. As long as he's out there for training camp, I would feel for the most part good about that. So I'm not worried right now about him not being out there for the, again, voluntary sessions of the off season. What is your take on that, George?
Yeah, I mean the injury itself is concerning. I mean, we all know that. I mean, like you talked about, there's no timeline on it. It's you're dealing with nerve issues, and you just wait for things to fire. He has said that everything's good, or at least everything's moving in the right direction in that regard. And he's been pretty upfront about that stuff. I mean, I think one of the things you know about Shaq, he's talked a lot about mental health, and he's usually not one of the guys that really dances around the injury. He's not going to tell you exactly what he's dealing with. But last year he said again and again, it wasn't right. He wasn't shy about talking about that. And then once the season was over, he got even more detailed that he couldn't even feel any sensation in that leg, which obviously cannot play football in that state. Those things have been corrected. So I think it's more right now about getting his strength back where it needs to be, and him feeling confident in his conditioning and being himself. You've heard a lot of that from him, in a little bit that he's talked this offseason, that he's been watching tape, from years in the past and trying to get back to being, the player that he was the first 3 years in the league. So I'm not concerned right now that he's not on the field. I am concerned with the injury just because of what we're dealing with here. I'm with you. I think if he's out there at training camp, all is well. I do think it's a good sign that he's out there. He's not on the field working, but he's out there on the sideline. I don't remember him being there last year during this time of year. He was during training camp, but I don't remember him being out there with the team, during OTAs. Those guys usually, when there's a really long timetable on them and they're worried about, the long-term future, they're not in the public view. They're inside, or they're not even at the facility sometimes.
Right.
They're working, with doctors somewhere. So that part's good. He's out there. He seems to be in really good spirits, which is positive. But we'll see. I mean, you go through so many of these things with this franchise, and the way some of these things have outcomes. I do not want to compare it to the Andrew Luck thing, though. I see that all the time, and I want to bring that up real quick. The Andrew Luck thing is a much like the quarterback himself. It's kind of a 1 in a million thing. You're not going to see that again. Even if this does eventually shorten Shaq's career, or you go back to this as sort of a turning point for him, it's not going to be the same as Andrew Luck. Nothing will ever be the same as what happened with Andrew Luck. That was a very unique circumstance with a very unique quarterback. It wasn't really the injury, that particular injury, that put him down. It was the accumulation of everything, to where he got to the point where the game was no longer fun for him. It was making his quality of life go down. That's not what's happening here. Shaq's nowhere near that from a mental standpoint right now. He's frustrated. I think anybody would be in his shoes, but I don't think he's anywhere to the point where he feels like football is making his life worse, which I think was definitely the case that was going on with Andrew Luck. So I don't think there's any comparison between those two circumstances, but it's a very concerning injury. I mean, anything going on with your back, it's a big deal, especially for an athlete. And then throw in the nerve issues. Yeah, it's a problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's something too everyone can relate to. Everyone has had back issues. Everyone feels like a pinched nerve, or your back tightens up, and you realize how immobile you are and how necessary your back is to basically just live a normal life and just do the things that normal people do, let alone play at an extremely high level and bring down men that are, 6'3", 240, running 100 miles an hour right at you, trying to tackle them to the ground. You could see how, like I said, how how impactful the back is and how, like I said, if you're not feeling up to it, how tough it is to do your job. I like the fact you said he's in good spirits. And also, too, I think you bring up a really good point of him just being there overall. Because if he was, let's say, far away, where like week one at this point, maybe he doesn't make it, make it public, but internally feels like that's probably not likely. You're probably not there because you're probably trying to do everything you can rehab wise to get back on the field as soon as possible. So even though it's what, a 90-minute practice, George, like even though, okay, you could say take a break from rehab and you can hang out and watch practice for a little bit, just the fact that I think he's out there shows you, or at least I'm going to pick it up as this, that he is closer maybe to returning, and that training camp, let's say, I don't say deadline, but that training camp target date is realistic just because it feels like if he was far away, at least if it was me, I would have assumed that you were just, like I said, maybe even at your own facility, your offseason training with your doctors, doing as much as you can to get back on the field as fast as possible. The fact that he is now in Indy and attending practices, not rehabbing 24/7, hopefully this has you feel like, okay, he's getting closer. And like I said, you don't got to be out there now, so there's no real reason to push it. But that training camp date that does feel, hopefully, fingers crossed, does feel pretty realistic.
Yeah, I think the whole defense, you're kind of waiting for training camp, right? You got Shaq out there, see what's going on with him. Juju Brents with the wrist injury and the surgery that he went through. Haven't gotten a chance to see him out there with the secondary. It feels like the whole defense is kind of waiting for training camp to get the first real look at them.
Let's talk about defense to end this, George, because we did have a news dump on Friday, classic NFL. The Arizona Cardinals announced they have flat out released DeAndre Hopkins. Now he's available to sign with any team he wants. And it's interesting, George, because this is a weird situation because he has basically talked and kind of flirted with his leaving and kind of at times openly basically talked like he was not a member of the Cardinals, even though he was a member of the Cardinals. And he was doing, I believe it was the I Am Athlete podcast, to give them the proper accreditation here. He was talking with them about, at one point, 5 quarterbacks he wants to play with. Anthony Richardson not listed as one in case you missed it. It was Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Justin Herbert, all 5 pretty damn good quarterbacks playing on 5 pretty damn good teams. So maybe right there tells you he's looking for a contender and is going to go to a team that is ready to win right now. But it is interesting, George, because maybe we can, maybe not for Diop specifically, but overall kind of talk about how attractive the Colts are in terms of maybe landing some high-level talent going forward here. DeAndre Hopkins was on the podcast, and he was talking about the 3 things he's looking for with his new team. Again, ironically, while he was still under contract with the Cardinals, but he was talking about he wants to play with a quarterback that loves the game. And what was it, George? Rallies guys around him?
It brings everyone on board.
Brings everyone on board. So leadership maybe will deduce there. And for Kyler Murray, I'm sure maybe you're not a big fan of those comments. So let's just overall say leadership from the quarterback. Stable front office, and for this conversation, we will include the owner, the GM, and the head coach, and a good defense, because defense still wins championships. Let's say those are 3 boxes, George. How many do you think right now the Colts could say they would check on DeAndre Hopkins' checklist? Can they get 1 out of 3?
It's hard too, because some of them are vague, and some of them are, I think they're open to a lot of interpretation. But the quarterback one, I would, they're starting, give them like half a check there. They're starting to go towards that. I think a rookie would be, in his case, off the board right away, just because you haven't shown it. You think he's going to develop into that guy, but you don't know it yet.
Right.
And Diop's on the wrong side of 30 or just turned 30. He's certainly not waiting it out, waiting to grow with a young quarterback. But I think other guys, and that's what we're talking about, other guys who might, because I think this is probably pretty common criteria. I think a lot of guys would say these are important elements in what they're looking for. Maybe not the 3 specific things, but I think they would be important to just about every NFL free agent, I would think, because they're all keys to winning. So I would give them like half a check there. They're heading towards that with quarterback. Everything with Anthony Richardson right now seems to suggest he certainly loves the game. He certainly, that side of it is checked. Can he bring guys on board? That's the part we got to find out. That's why it's half a check mark,
I think it's also, sorry to cut you off, but just to keep on this topic, I think it's also important to, like, I will give a little bit of an assumption here, but the one thing we heard consistently from Shane Steichen especially was he wants to get a quarterback before they made the draft pick that loves the game, right? That's obsessed with the game. So I think it's like you said, we have not seen a lot of Anthony Richardson, so it's unfair to say what kind of leader he is and what kind of guy he is. But the fact that Steichen kind of maybe talked about that more than any other trade he's looking for, I think it's fair to assume that the Colts feel at least good enough that Richardson is obsessed and loves the game to where I think for Hopkins' sake, and like I said, any for agent's sake, I think we can, like I said, where that half check comes in is I think it's fair to assume, although it's been very little that we've seen of Richardson so far, I think it's fair to assume that the love of the game is definitely there.
You can see that too. I mean, people, as they start getting out of training camp, will see it. It's obvious on the field. I mean, he's either dancing in between sets, like when they're moving from one spot to another, or just the little things that he's doing. He'll mimic his throwing motion after, I think we talked about this after that very first practice. You know, when he's not taking reps, he'll mimic his throwing motion. He's still like taking shadow reps, on the side. But he'll get mad sometimes, not like angry, but you can see him demonstrably kind of correcting himself, even on some completions, where he'll make a throw and then you'll see him just sort of shake his head or throw his arm in the air. So he knows there was something about it that he didn't like. And to me, that's the obsession, with the craft. And you see it. It's pretty plain out there even right now. So I think that's definitely something you can check. Leadership, we'll see. That takes more than a year in the league to
Right.
kind of figure out where that's going. As far as the stability thing goes, I think a year ago that would have been a really strong check mark. Now, I don't know. You have an owner that kind of dipped into team affairs to a degree that you would really rather not see happen a year ago. He seems to be back on track now. He seems to be the Jim Irsay we all knew prior to last season. But that's still, if I'm D-Hop or any other free agent, that's in the back of my mind that it happened. You've got a GM who's in year 7 with a losing record. Obviously has the backing of the owner, but a lot rides on this first year head coach and this rookie quarterback there. I don't know that would, there's certainly be teams that would score higher on that card than the Colts. And then you've got a first year head coach. So that's not stability. He's just started. So I would not give them that check mark. I don't know about you.
Oh, no, not at all. And like I said, especially too, you're coming off of a year in which Jim Irsay went totally rogue and hired Jeff Saturday to be the head coach. Not that we expect Shane Steichen this to be a disaster or think he's going to get fired quickly, but like if you're Hopkins, you can't look at that situation and go, "Oh yeah, like that's not going to happen in my time there." Jim Irsay is unpredictable. He is a fan, which I think in some cases works out really well. He will do whatever it takes to win. Right? He's not cheap. He will listen to the guys for the most part that he hires. Like there are some really good qualities about Jim Irsay that I think that a lot of teams would love to have. There are also plenty of negative ones as well. And sometimes that fandom works as a double-edged sword where sometimes it's too over the top. He's too rash. He makes decisions like, he's living in the past of Jeff Saturday. Oh, he's his friend. He's a franchise legend. Let's just bring him in. He'll be no experience, no problem. He'll come in. It'll work out to perfection. And then after he goes 1-8 in his 9-game tryout, we're going to give him not only one interview, 2 interviews to see if he could truly get the job. It's one of those where, there is absolutely, you cannot give them the benefit of the doubt in terms of stability, especially if you're Hopkins, when you kind of look at I don't know about you, George. I would argue right now the Cardinals have replaced the Commanders, especially with the ownership change that's about to come, as the most dysfunctional team in the league. When you see the moves they made where you fire Cliff Kingsbury and their GM, Steve Keim, a year after giving them extensions, Kyler Murray right now, it feels like he's in the middle of no man's land. You fired a first-year head coach in Steve Wilkes, and you moved on from Josh Rosen a year after they were hired and drafted. And then you see kind of all the rash moves they have made. And then before that, he was in Houston where Bill O'Brien and the GM are basically having a Game of Thrones power struggle or a Succession power struggle, felt like. So he has been the last 2 stops in some pretty toxic environments. And it's like you look at the Colts, sure, it seems things are headed in a better direction, but it's not that long ago, George, where you see some of the moves they made. It's like, holy cow, that's an owner that is unpredictable, and that's not a guy that I want to kind of hitch my wagons to right now.
And the key word there is stability. And that means that it's been going on for, a period of time here. So I don't think 3 months is going to be stability for him.
But
That's
no
just my
games were
guess.
played, and there's really no adversity faced.
Right. I don't think that's really going to cover it. So, I'm going to be embarrassing a little bit, but I'm way behind. I'm just catching up now with Ted Lasso because we just got Apple TV. And so I'm watching the introductory press conference for him, and there were some flashbacks there. I think the only thing that was really missing was the owner talking about sausage and the CIA. I mean, that was I have a little bit of PTSD. I'll be honest. When I'm watching it, like it's a good show, but that scene was tough for me.
I don't know how the sausage is made, but I know how. What was it? Football? I forget. I mean, honestly, I've tried to push that press conference out of my mind. The thing that sticks is the upper quartile in terms of winning over a long period of time, which we did not get that Ted Lasso reference. Maybe if this show was made now instead of 5 years ago, you could have got that reference from Jason Sudeikis thrown in there as well. But you're right, there are some eerie similarities when you have a Wichita State football coach going to coach English Premier Soccer and an NFL analyst going from the TV booth 1 week to the head coaching slot the next.
It was a little rough watch. I'll say that. The rest of it, great show, but that was a little tough. That being said, great defense is the third criteria. I've talked about this a lot this offseason. I don't know where this defense is right now, but look, at every level, they lost a key critical player. Whether it's Yannick Ngakoue, who led the team in sacks last year. Bobby Okereke was second in tackles and the best coverage linebacker they had on the team. Stephon Gilmore, who was best corner they'd had here in probably since Vontae Davis's heyday. And then Rodney McLeod, who statistically, he did have 4 interceptions, so it's not like he did nothing. But his impact was even bigger in the locker room. As a leader, as a guy who kind of held everything together on that back end. And I don't feel like any of them were, again, when we talk about not giving them benefit of the doubt, on paper, none of them were really replaced in a clear and like awe-inspiring way. I mean, Samson Ebukam, maybe he's going to develop into something, but on his resume is not Yannick Ngakoue's. If Shaq's healthy, then yeah, you've replaced Okereke, but we don't know. That's still a question there. And then at this point, Stephon Gilmore is being replaced by likely a rookie. And Julian Blackmon, love him, great potential, but he's not been able to stay healthy. I don't know that he is on paper again, the hands down solid replacement for Rodney McLeod. Now maybe all these guys work out, and maybe the defense goes to the next level in the second year under Gus Bradley, but we just got done talking about not giving them the benefit of the doubt. And on paper, this defense, in my mind, taking a step back, not a step forward.
Especially, too, when it's a massive and two of the most important areas for a defense to be good, and especially in today's pass-heavy league, get after the quarterback and stopping the pass in the secondary. And look, like I said, it's a massive question mark about their ability to consistently rush the passer. Can Kwity Paye build off a solid end and really stay healthy and also now put up consistent production? Can the Colts secondary right now that's super inexperienced, it's going to feature, almost everyone, like I said, either, everyone's going to be very young and still kind of learning kind of on the job almost for the most part. It's, can you have a very inexperienced secondary now play well? No. So it's like you look at right now the two most important areas on the defense in terms of getting after the quarterback and stopping the pass, both massive question marks at best. And there's really no reason right now to believe that either will be a positive in 2023. So it's just like another where, yes, not only do they take a step down in talent, they also take a step down in consistency. And if you can't get after the passer consistently, if your secondary is constantly having coverage busts, just can't flat out defend, like they're gonna be in big time trouble. So I'm with you right there. That's maybe out of the three, George, the quarterback, the front office ability, and the defense right now. I think the defense might be last in that list just because, like I said, of the importance of the secondary, importance of the pass rush, and how severe questions and really doubts there are about both of them.
Yeah, and those guys they lost in secondary, that's a lot of leadership too. I mean, McLeod was a vocal leader, Gilmore was a leader by example. He was just showing these guys how it's done. I mean, I remember training camp, he came out day one making plays, and you're like, wait a minute, sometimes corners in this league, I think it was Chuck Pagano used to call them Ferraris. Like, they're high performance, but there's a lot of maintenance that you needed too. And so you don't always see them out there, the top level guys in training camp going hard every snap, going hard, in every drill. And Gilmore was that guy. It was really hard for the other corners to not follow suit. I mean, when you've got this former defensive player of the year out there, making plays and showing you, setting the standard, it's really hard for the other guys to take a day off or to take a rep off. Not that that's their mentality. I'm not saying that's going to happen this year, but you're still missing that element. I think that was huge for this team. Look, Juju Brents may be a great player in this league. Maybe he's the next star cornerback for this team. I don't know. But again, the benefit of the doubt, they haven't earned it. And it could all work out. I mean, there are ways. Kwity Paye and Odangbo and that whole group together picks up the pass rush. Shaq's healthy. That'd be a huge upgrade for the entire defense. And then, Julius Brents comes along really fast at that spot, and Blackman can stay healthy. It's not like it's completely off the table, but again, the benefit of the doubt is not there. And on paper, they've taken a step back. And great defense. That was questionable last year if they fit that. They were good for times during the year, but great defense was a question mark last year. This year, that I don't think you can check that box.
And another thing that's a little concerning too is I'm glad you brought up Gilmore, not only helping out the secondary, like the other inexperienced players, because like you said, he was the one kind of setting the standard and say, hey, look, I'm going to set the tone right now by locking down and winning this rep. Also, too, you've heard, especially Alec Pierce, talk about how much Gilmore helped him and his development when you're going against one of the best. Iron sharpens iron. So just going and having those training camp reps, Alec Pierce, he developed faster in training camp because he was going against that guy. And you look so far on paper, George, it looks this year to be the opposite. It looks like the offense is going to be the one pushing the defense to have them become better. And that's also a little concerning when you're talking about Michael Pittman Jr., who is, I would say right now, a solid number 2 receiver. He's not worked his way up into that, bona fide number 1 range. Alec Pierce is going into year number 2. Josh Downs is a rookie. Isaiah McKenzie's bounced around. And you have Anthony Richardson, who is a rookie quarterback trying to figure it out on his own. It's like the fact that the offense, and especially, the skill players are going to have to try to make the defense better. That's a little concerning as well, because it's not like there's a lot of game breakers out there where it's like, oh, wow, you're going against Megatron in practice. That's going to make you better, even though you're getting toasted every time. You're going to learn a lot. It's really like there's no one stud guy that's going to, be able to kind of make everyone better. Gilmore was the guy last year. There's no one like that this year. And that's also, when you talk about so many guys that are inexperienced that need development on the offensive end and the defensive end, sometimes that could work to your disadvantage.
The one thing I will say, I'm looking forward to see what Steichen's training camp practices are like, but there's energy in these OTAs. It's really high, fast paced. There's not a lot of downtime for anybody. And I do think he's trying to add competition to things. I talked earlier about the coaches being a defensive line sometimes in 7-on-7, and they have their pads up, just to give them a look. The other day, they had coaches, even just in the warm-up drills, where the quarterbacks are just throwing the ball to the trainers, and the people like that, equipment guys. They had coaches out there that occasionally it was unpredictable. They would come in and knock the ball down just because they were standing in the area, and they would go to a different guy every now and again. And it's just little things that maybe add competition, not so much the iron sharpens iron, but I do think that's one element here that'll be interesting to watch as we get into training camp. I think it's one of the things Pete Carroll's really done well with the Seahawks is to make every day a very competitive day and every drill a competitive drill. And there are at least early, the same way as we were talking about, don't overreact to a couple throws from Anthony Richardson, don't overreact to a couple of open practices with Shane Steichen, but there are signs early that he might have a little bit of that in him.
Which is good because, like I said, you want, especially with a young team, it helps have a competitive edge. And like I said, the thing is you want better players in order to compete. And that's kind of, especially on the offensive line, you talk about just the lack of bodies to be able to compete. But it's still, at the end of the day, like I said, you want a training camp where it's not like, okay, everyone's role is defined. And especially too, I think it helps in a way, Shane Steichen, not only that he's a first-time coach or a new coach, but also that you're talking about dealing with a rookie quarterback. Because as you know, George, rookies quarterbacks kind of set the tone for everyone, right? And so it's like if you have now competition, even at quarterback, that I feel like almost somebody just bleeds down to the rest of the team because it's like if Anthony Richardson is fighting for every rep and competing with Gardner Minshew in, like I said, even in warm-up drills, I think that just naturally kind of permeates throughout the rest of the team. And hopefully, like I said, like that competitive edge is there where they are kind of a scrappy team. I think you do see that in the NFL a lot with teams that are young. They are scrappy, that they are intense, and that they, even in games they lose, they kind of always are fighting and clawing. If that's one of the hallmarks of this team in 2023, I would say that's a win.
Yeah, and again, it's too early. It's way too early. It's a broken record with that, but it's still May, so it's too early. But it's something I really want to keep my eye on as I get in training camp, because then you're going to see practice day after day. And right now, there seems to be a little bit of a competitive fire out there that Shane Steichen's trying to inject in this team. And it does seem like his personality. What little we know about him, clips you see from Philadelphia, he seems like that kind of guy. I agree. I think it'd be good for a young team.
And it's the real test is going to be in like day 15 of training camp when everyone is tired, no one wants to be there. Can you still have that same level? If so, that shows obviously his message is permeating, and that shows that at least there's a legitimate buy-in. It's easy now in day 4 of OTAs in May, not a lot of pads on. Oh, okay, we're excited to be back. Let's compete. Let's have some fun. When the grind at training camp is there, George, that is when you could truly kind of see if the message is seeping in, if these guys are truly bought in and, like I say, competing in everything they do.
That's a really good point too, because like right before the Bears get here, that's not officially official, but everybody's kind of accepting that they're going to come and do joint practices.
They still have not made that official. Wasn't that like as soon as the schedule was out? Like it's like, oh,
the people in Chicago talked about it, but I think there's still contracts to be signed, and around here, it's a good idea to make sure that those contracts are signed before you make it official. But I think those practices right before that, that's usually where you see it, because you've gone through a preseason game already and you've been in camp for a couple of weeks and another team's coming. And so those practices right before that other team comes in are usually some of the worst ones at camp, because there's just, like you said, it's usually as hot as it is at any point in the year too. So that's another.
You're tired of hitting the same guy. Like you're going against the same 3 or 4 guys every practice. You're tired of hitting the same guy every day. You want to see someone else. Right. You kind of almost like
game. Right. You got a team coming in. It's just like, it's like those last couple of days before summer break in school. Nobody's paying attention. They're just ready to go. And it'll be interesting to see, like, how does he react to those kind of things? And does the team respond? It will be something to watch.
Absolutely something to watch for as we inch our way closer to training camp, just about 2 months or so away from kind of getting things kicked off here in the first year of Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson. So we do have a little bit of a schedule change for next week, just because. So we have 2 more public OTA viewing sessions. It's Friday and Wednesday, George, right? So this Friday, I don't have a calendar in front of me. That's like June 2nd, June 3rd, roughly. And then the Wednesday, a week from, if you're listening to this on Wednesday, a week from that day, we're listening to this on Tuesday, the 30th. So about a week away or so, roughly. So our plan is to have 2 pods next week. This is going to be the only pod for this specific week. Then we're going to have one on Monday to react to a lot of what we saw of open media session, or open OTA session, I should say, number 2. And then Wednesday to kind of wrap up the OTA public part, to kind of get you what we thought there of the 10 OTA practices, and then kind of get you set for mini camp as well. So this is the only show of the week for this week. And next week, Monday, Wednesday, we will have two pods in those days, kind of react to what we see in sessions 2 and 3 of the open media portion of OTAs. Before we get out of here, George, really quickly, it was just a holiday weekend. Well, how we kick up the summer? Any good food options that you back on the grill? What was the Memorial Day weekend like in the Bremer household?
Yeah, well, back on the grill for sure. So that was a big
hamburgers
yesterday, because that's a Memorial Day tradition. The one thing that was sad is, and you can probably hear it a little bit still in my voice, it's been a terrible week for just spring in general for my sinuses and everything. I missed the race on Sunday because of it. So
really
happy about that, because I'm always down there. But hey, wait till next year, right?
Wow, jeez. I mean, yeah, the damn allergies. Wow, kicked it down on Sunday. Jeez,
horrific too. I mean, you can probably still hear it in my voice a little bit now. Like it's just it's been one of those years. So, and then it's still the holiday weekend too. So you're mowing the lawn, and we cleaned out the garage. That didn't help. That did not help
No.
those areas.
So it was a not so happy Memorial Day weekend to kick off the summer. That is for sure. Outside of the grilling,
Trade it all out though. I mean, once you get hamburgers, I'll take the rest of it. I'm okay with that.
roasted corn on the grill.
There was not roasted corn, but there was corn. So
Nice.
halfway there.
We did the same thing. Burgers on the grill Monday. It's especially with the first grill of the season. It's always. Are you? Let me ask you this: are you a griller all year long, or just in the summertime?
I wish when we were in Florida we were, because
Makes sense.
Now there's a lot of times where you don't want to walk outside the door. You know how it goes. Once it gets cold enough, like it's it's the reason basketball is such a big thing here in Indiana. This is about 4 or 5 months you do not want to leave the confines of indoor facilities.
Same. Grilling season for us is basically May to October-ish before it kind of really turns. Because September is still nice enough where you can, have a few like Indian summer days and still have it right where you're not freezing, putting on 10 layers just to go stand out there for 10 minutes to grill some burgers. So I'm with you there. It's a short grilling season, which is nice. You kind of kick off opening weekend, kind of get that first burger back on the grill. It hits different. That is for sure.
That's what you notice, not so much anymore, but with the RCA Dome, you definitely did. That was always the smell of football season. You get there and the tailgaters are out there and the parking lot just has that grill smell to it. And you're like, all right, it's football season.
We're back.
It sticks in your mind. It's a little bit of that Lucas Oil, but I think it's more where we park that's different from the media side of things. We're not in that part of the fan base, but that's always to me that was the sign. Even growing up, but it's football season. We start smelling the tailgates.
The grill haze. We got to get the media parking lot back near the right in the middle of the grill haze, as you can walk in and kind of really get we're ready for game day. Football is definitely back, but summer's here. At least so before football season, obviously enjoy the nice little time that summer does have to offer. So nice to kind of have an official summer kickoff back and ready to go. So that'll do it for this edition of the Blue Horseshoe Pod. As always, make sure you check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Blue Horseshoe Pod, bright blue logo is where our new feed is on YouTube. Blue Horseshoe Pod as well. Subscribe. George, I don't know if you saw it. We have surpassed the 600 subscriber mark. So appreciate to you all of those new subscribers. Welcome. If you want to help us keep exploding, tell your friends about us. We are here again every Tuesday, at least in the off season. We ratchet that up as training camp gets closer. But again, next week, Monday, Wednesday, 2 pods next week. So nice little daily dip as we kick off the first official week of June to kind of wrap up OTA. So make sure you keep your eyes on that. And the best way to do so, right, is very easy. Subscribe on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you do get your pods. Have a great week, a great weekend as well. We'll talk to you on Monday, but where else? Right here on the Blue Horseshoe Podcast.